Ooh, look at that, Martha. I've never seen one like that before.
It's the new game, Spotlight.
Well, I am very excited. It is the designer of possibly the hottest game around at the moment that came out of Gen Con absolutely exploding. And that is David Somerville, the designer of Vast, the Crystal Caverns. Good evening.
I'm so glad to be here. Hi.
So, first question, and I'm sure you've been asked this loads of times, but I looked at the Kickstarter when it came out last year. Why the name change?
Oh, sure. It's a short story. When we started the game, I at that point looked around and didn't see anything else named Trove, so I thought, this seems like a good name. It captured a lot of the spirit of it. What there was a small MMORPG that sort of was developed concurrently with our game called Trove. So they became a real product with a real user base, and when the Kickstarter did really well, they sent us not a cease and desist letter, but a very nice please get off our lawn letter. And we talked about whether it was worth being combative with that. But first off, it felt like a sign of success. It was like, oh, people actually notice this, so that's good. So we felt happy about that. And then we just thought, we could make the story of this game about a legal battle over a name, or we could take the hit, find something else that's wonderful, and call it that from that point on. So that's why the name changed. And I do like Vast. I still catch myself saying Trove now and then, because it was just that for several years of my life. But I think Vast captures the ambition of the game, and I like that a lot.
And there's the assonance with caverns and things like that. So.
Yeah.
And I guess computer game companies have more sort of legal resources at their disposal than board game companies, I would assume, if you were to fight it.
Probably, although you never know. It's more just like, I don't know what weapon he's carrying, and I know that I'm not carrying a big one, so I'll just let him pass.
That's right. A vindication of the hidden arms law there.
I don't know if it's a vindication, but an expression of it, for sure.
Okay, so let's get back to the sort of the history of the game. Mm-hmm. So it's a co-design, right, with Patrick Leader. Is that correct?
Right, yeah. I started it and worked on it for about a year myself. In a very public way. I published almost every iteration of the game on BGG in a work in progress thread, and had community input at every turn. So it's been sort of co-designed with Board Game Geek from the beginning. So I got it to a playable state where sort of the idea was fully expressed, but it wasn't polished. And then at that point, signed Patrick Leader as the publisher and sent it to him. And then he sort of took my unbalanced game that was very, very unbalanced, very swingy, could last anywhere from half an hour to 3 hours, and sort of combed it down and broke it down into its component parts and reworked it from the ground up, sort of a Ship of Theseus style, to transform it into a real modern great game.
And so was the initial concept always to have this sort of very stark asymmetry and have players with, vastly different goals that sort of bounced off each other? Yeah,
that was from the very beginning. It sort of started as a friend had asked me to help him work on a video game, sort of like kind of Clash of Clans before that was a thing. And it didn't really work out, but I was like, maybe there's a board game here. I started working on it and realized very quickly that it was more interesting if there was sort of a dungeon master and a player. But then as I was developing that, sort of like the cave placement and the goblin placement were both complicated enough sets of mechanics that I was like, well, maybe there's something to just having the environment be a thing. And I had been interested in asymmetry before that as a sort of a way of bringing different styles of gamers together. It had been sort of a passion interest of mine. So I was like, well, we could achieve multiple goals. We could have, very deep gameplay from very different perspectives, and maybe bring together types of players who might normally enjoy two different games together around one game. And then that just sort of exploded outwards from there. Yeah, it seems very interesting. When I first saw the Kickstarter, when I first read about it, it seemed that really actually a very simple idea, that you have all these different factors within a D&D session, but you have a DM against the players. But why not have everybody play
every component part. It seems so simple, and yet once I saw it, I thought, of course, why hadn't this been done before?
Right, and that's the golden moment. That's what, you want to chase that, oh, that's so obvious sort of moment.
When did you come up? Because what everyone is talking about, the thing that really arrests people, is not the playing goblins playing the knight, although having seen previews of the game, that looks great, but the cave.
Right.
Everyone's saying, wow, you get to play the cave.
Right.
How weird. When did that come into the process?
Very early. Although I think at first I was hesitant to just call it the cave, so I think I had a mythology about there being a guardian or sort of a cave spirit, and then eventually just shed that and was like, you're the cave, and that's great. I have a long history with British magical stories, not just Lord of the Rings, but also things like, of course I'm going to blank on the name right now, but Five Children and It, and George MacDonald, and just sort of these Peter Pan, just worlds in which you can get lost and in which sort of the environment is as much of a character and is as sort of thinking and present as the characters who are lost in it. So I think I kind of had that as a storyteller's desire from an early standpoint, and it just seemed like such a great way of making the experience of going into the cave memorable each time. On a computer game, you have a cave player. It's just the computer who's deciding when things happen and how and why. And so to bring that into the board game space seemed like a really fun challenge.
The cave seems the ultimate curmudgeon to me. I'd rather destroy myself than have these idiots running around inside me for one more second.
Exactly. I thought about the cave's mentality a good-ish bit. In Fellowship of the Ring, there's a moment where they're just outside of Moria, and there's a thing in the water, and they sort of disturb it. And what was so compelling, that's like maybe my favorite moment in all of Lord of the Rings, and it's such a small, weird moment, but what was compelling to me about that is it's not good or evil. It doesn't hate them because it's an agent of darkness. It hates them because it's old and it's at rest, and they're not, and they're disturbing it. And so you get a little bit of this psychology if you look at the cave's player board. I wrote the flavor text for everyone except the thief in the game, and there's a little flavor text on the board, and it just talks about to be empty, to echo, and that sense of sort of the passive verb as the ideal seemed like a really interesting psychological place to explore.
So you talked about having many iterations before it was picked up.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the process of getting it published. How did that happen? Was it buzz on Board Game Geek, or did you shop it around to lots of publishers?
Both and. I have never had the luxury of going to many conventions, so I wasn't able to do the full publisher circuit and show it to as many people as I'd like. I found one interesting publisher. I cold emailed a bunch of publishers and had some very nice refusal letters for all the right reasons from a bunch of different people, many of whom I respect and would be eager to work with in the future, all of whom I respect. I got one pitch with a publisher who, if I said his name, you would know it. He liked it a lot, but it was the pre-Patrick version, so it was still the very swingy, unbalanced one, and he very accurately saw, this isn't a finished game. But it was his encouragement and his advice to keep playtesting it that really helped me to bring it to the final place where it was ready for publication. So I showed it to people, sent out print and plays, sent out some nice Game Crafter versions. But all the while I was doing that, I was also running this BGG work in progress thread. And from very early on, Patrick Leader had been a participant on that thread, and a very active, generous, excited about the idea, sort of got what I was going for. And he actually recently tweeted his original cold email to me, which was just like, hey, I love what you're doing. I've got one Kickstarted game. I'd love to tackle this, which I saw and I was like, I really appreciate that spirit. I'd love to get with, a big publisher if I can. And then the more that I sort of looked at big publishers and looked at Patrick, just his inspiration for the game, his love for it, his understanding of the objective became more and more and more compelling until I suddenly realized there was no one I would rather have publish this game than Patrick.
Well, it's interesting. If you look at the sort of ethos of the game and the sort of aesthetic of the game, now I don't want to damn you with faint praise here, but it seems sort of archetypically a sort of indie idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that's right.
And I think the art is very unique. And I think if it were to have the kind of very slick, very polished art that certain game companies produce, I think it would lose something of that sort of indie spirit that it has.
I think that's right. Yeah, I think the art that we have for it is perfect. I scoured Google search results for who knows how many pages to find Kyle Farron, our artist, and the moment I saw it, I knew that's what I wanted. But yeah, it was always a strange game, and so there needed to be a certain strangeness about the art, but it's also a very simple and archetypical game. So there needed to be something immediately emotionally resonant about the art, and I think Kyle's line most resembles Bill Watterson. So there's almost a Calvin and Hobbes aspect to what you see. So
certainly the knight looks like it's jumped straight out of a Calvin and Hobbes.
Right. So you fall into this just very comfortable, nostalgic place of, oh, it's a knight, it's a dragon, I get it, and you feel that in the art, but then that same strangeness also prepares you for the experience of playing a game that's unlike other gameplay experiences you've had.
But I think also sets you up for that sense of it being a joyful experience, a funny experience, rather than being, a serious, heavy experience. Right.
Yeah, I knew from the start that I never wanted sort of not that there's anything wrong with it, but the deep, dark, descent, claustrophobia, art, that is great for those games. It's perfect for those games. But the experience of playing Vast is so social and so imaginative and so unexpected. And there's a lot of joy. The cards, there's a sense of humor in the game, and that needed to come through sort of at every level.
And so, were you trepidatious to go the Kickstarter route initially?
I wasn't, because we had no other route.
Right.
We had nobody offering money to do a self-funded print run. I think we talked briefly, because of the popularity of the work in progress thread, about just taking pre-orders and building up to that way, which is still not an uninteresting idea. But I think Kickstarter is as much a way to get the word out about a project as it is to fund the project.
Right.
So
it's sort of free inverted commas marketing, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Free monetarily, incredibly expensive labor-wise, but worth it. So yeah, I think that we were just excited. I was obviously nervous, stage jitters, to launch the Kickstarter, but had no question in our mind that was the way to go to get the game into reality.
And so, how long did it take to fund initially?
Less than 30 hours.
Wow, because I'm looking at I've got the Kickstarter page up here now, and you made a good chunk of change.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in comparison to the initial goal. Were you surprised by that?
We were. We had high hopes given everybody's enthusiasm on Twitter, on the work in progress thread, for the game. We hoped it would do well, but there's no way to know. I think a thing about the internet is it's very easy to fall into your little ecosphere, and you think you're the best and everyone loves you, and 20 people know about you and they think you're great, and there's 7 billion people in the world. So it was very easy to, just wonder, is this game going to succeed on the level we think it should based on our response, or are we just hearing the same people saying, we love this idea a lot? So seeing it fund so rapidly and then seeing the numbers continue to climb was really rewarding. And we had people who were tracking the metrics, who had access to other metrics from Kickstarter, say that our experience was really abnormal and was really a sign of something special, and that was exciting.
And so what's the current state of the game? Because it was at Gen Con and it sold out, right?
Right, yeah. We sold out at Gen Con on Saturday, a little afternoon, and I don't have access to the actual warehouse numbers, but my understanding is that Patrick has concluded selling the first print run, and I know that at the moment he's taking pre-orders for the second print run, which we're expecting out the first half of next year. I believe Q1 of next year, but I don't want to make any promises that Patrick is later going to have my head for appropriately.
Yeah. So that print run has gone into distribution now, and do you know if that distribution is solely North America, or is that the rest of the world too? I'm basically angling to see if I can buy it.
You can definitely pre-order it right now at Patrick's website. The distribution deals I know are occurring. I don't think it's out of line to say that we talk to a number of distributors, not all of whom were North American, at Gen Con. I don't know that any deals have been inked yet, but I know that everyone's very excited about making things work.
And so what's the future for the game? Are you working on expansion material, or do you think it's a project that's sort of self-contained and doesn't need anything else doing to it?
The great thing about the game is that it is almost infinitely expandable. I just saw a comment somewhere about, well, this looks like great, but I can't imagine adding more roles. The funny thing about embracing pure asymmetry is there's sort of an underlying economy to the game, right? You understand it takes a certain amount of energy to achieve your goals, and you sort of start to learn what are the levers you pull to do that. So a piece is probably, a role probably needs to move or to affect the physical play space some way. A piece probably needs to acquire some sort of resource, whether that's killing goblins or laying down tiles that get you more crystals and drawing tokens. So once you start to sort of see the patterns in the roles, it becomes fairly not straightforward, but like you get inspired to add more and more and more roles. So we have a laundry list of future expansions that we have, and some of them are gags. I don't know if I'm sure we won't do this, but we talked about adding Indiana Jones's boulder as a roll. It's an intelligent rolling rock that would be roll and move. So you just roll a die and then try and crush as many people as you could. So there's lighthearted stuff like that, which I'm sure will never see the light of day except as a PNP. But then there's very serious. I know that they are working on two kinds of expansions. One is just individual roles that you can add to Vast as it exists, and or alternate sort of roles for what you have. So like, for example, I think they're working on, I know one that's just on BGG right now is the Thieves Guild. So instead of the thief being cursed by a warlock who he's trying to pay off, you're sending in a different thief every time, sort of from the guild. So there's more expansions, sort of variants like that. The other type of expansion is the full big box sequel expansion, which is, I think the working title right now is Vast the Mysterious Manor. So that has four or five roles in a similar relationship to the Crystal Caverns, which, as it stands in development right now, I believe are a paladin, a band of orcs, a giant spider / spellcaster, and the manor itself. So it's the same sort of network of relationships, but each of those roles plays differently from the ones in Vast, the Crystal Caverns, and the whole game has a slightly different, a little spookier flavor to it.
And that's a self-contained game, potentially.
Right, yeah. And I think they're still working out what the crossover relationship is, if you can bring the paladin into the cave or the dragon into the manor. I'm not sure if they'll be cross-convertible. I think my instinct is that they won't, or they'll require some sort of a kit to bring over. But that's all the stuff that Patrick is working out right now. Yeah,
I mean, getting a dragon through doors is hard work. I mean, they're big things.
Right, exactly. Well, theoretically, I don't know if he's putting a ceiling on it, so it could just be like a descent kind of a thing.
That's true. Or just a big sort of service lift.
Yeah, exactly. Those double doors that you move the banquet table through.
But how difficult is it to balance all the roles that play off each other, or is that important to you? Is balance a consideration? It's
incredibly important and incredibly difficult and incredibly time consuming. So there are actually 3 credited designers / developers on the game. Patrick and I are co-designers, and then Patrick and Kyle Wolfel are co-developers. And what happened is I took the game to playable concept, Patrick took it to modern board game, and then Kyle took it to 1 to 5 player perfectly balanced experience. So Kyle played endless solo variants, endless combinations of the roles, and between Patrick and Kyle, I don't even know how many hundreds of games they've logged. The balance on the game is incredibly tight, and it's actually one of the things that we're proudest of. And so what about you as a designer? Are you going to focus solely on Vast, or do you have other things in the works? I think that Patrick and Kyle are in this amazing groove right now, and I think that my best contribution to Vast was sort of the initial idea and sort of demonstration of the concept. They're still very kindly welcoming all of my input into theme development. I'm a play tester, so I'm still a part of the crew, which is great. But I'm sort of kicking up some other ideas. I'm going to be working with Jason Anarchy of Drinking Quest on a new Kickstarter coming out hopefully before the end of the year. which is a little mostly solo, although there might be a multiplayer variant. Mountain climbing survival game. It's lighthearted. It's called Die Trying. So I have that. I have a game inspired by Stranger Things that I've been working on, actually since Gen Con. On the train ride home from Gen Con, I obsessively started designing while the inspiration was with me and babbling about that incessantly on Twitter. So I have a few other projects that I'm kicking around as my primary focus, while Patrick and Kyle are working on the vast variants and sequels.
Fabulous. Well, I'd just like to say thanks very much for giving up your time, your precious lunch hour.
There's no better way to spend it.
And I'm really looking forward, as I told you off air, a friend of mine kickstarted it. He's got his copy. I'm really looking forward to giving Vast a go.
Great. I can't wait for you to play. I hope that you'll love it, and I think you probably will.
Brilliant. So, David Somerville, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a complete pleasure.